Welcome to the Teachers on Fire podcast, where I profile agents of growth and transformation in education today. Each guest shares their highs, their lows, their passions, their goals, and the resources that are shaping their thinking and inspiring their practice. For show notes and links from each episode, visit teachersonfire.net. You can also follow the show at Teachers on Fire on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And of course, please subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm your host, Tim Cavey. Let's meet today's guest. Today I'm speaking with Shannon Schinkel. Shannon is an inclusive BC high school teacher, progressive assessment maker, part-time actor, blogger, and reader. She is also the creator and administrator of Beyond Report Cards on Facebook, a group that you really need to be a part of. Follow Shannon on Twitter at DramaQueenBRC and, of course, on her blog at mygrowthmindset.home.blog. And I mentioned as well her Facebook group, Beyond Report Cards. Shannon, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Are you ready to talk education?
Oh, I'm sure I am. I'm pretty pumped.
All right. Well, you bring the energy and the passion, and that's what's made me very excited for this conversation. Shannon, why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about your current context in education? What does that look like for you?
So, I'm a high school drama and humanities educator in Prince George, and I've been teaching for about 21 years. My school is comprised of about 1,300 grades 7 to 12 students from a variety of backgrounds. We have at-risk students, and we have the highest number of Aboriginal students in the district in this high school. Plus, we have choice programs like Polar Performing Arts, project-based learning, Montessori, music, and hockey. I'm currently the lead for my school's secondary assessment learning team, affectionately called the SALT team. And I have been helping and supporting colleagues on their gradeless journeys. I don't have a formal title, but a lot of people call me, an assessment junkie, which is, I think, pretty perfect.
Well, that's great to hear. And I do look forward to unpacking the complexity of trying to engineer and move the needle forward on gradeless assessment while still within, I think your high school is still a graded report card, correct?
It is, yeah. There still are letter grades, and gradeless right now is only for our grades 7, 8, and 9 students. And again, they still have a letter grade at the end on their report cards from grade 7 to grade 12. Yep.
Yeah, I look forward to unpacking that further because I think a lot of educators are kind of where you are. I mean, philosophically, they're sold on gradeless assessment, but they're working within these systems that haven't moved that way yet. But before we go any further, Shannon, let's talk about just how you are doing in general. What has your headspace been like, and what does remote learning look like for you these days?
Oh boy, it's been a roller coaster of emotions. At the start of remote learning, I was pretty down because was just finding my rhythm with some seniors. I was teaching English 11 new media, and they were embracing gradeless structures and student-centered learning and self-assessing, and remote learning just brought that to a screeching halt. And when you find a rhythm and you can see that things are going really well with a group of students, and then take a left turn, you actually wonder and you second guess yourself and you start thinking, well, maybe I can't continue this. But I just had to take a deep breath and try to make it work. I'm working from home, as many of my colleagues are in our district. We have the opportunity to actually work from home, so I'm pretty much living in my office, but trying to keep some kind of schedule and establish a routine in the workday. And I'm writing a lot and reading a lot just to try to help with isolation. I'm pretty obsessed with Audible right now too.
Well, that is amazing. I haven't gotten into Audible as much. I do occasionally pick up a book when I see great sales on, they come into my email, but I'm still listening to a lot of podcasts. And I echo what you said about living in my office. That's kind of how things look here at the KV House as well. Before we go any further, I do want to hear a story from you about a low moment or an experience of adversity that you faced in your teaching or education career, and tell us how you overcame it.
So already talking about how I've been gradeless now for a while, and assessment's been my passion for, oh god, well over 10 years. I blog a lot about gradeless and standards based grading, and a lot of people already know that. But a couple of years ago, after spending a year in which we were asked to play around with going gradeless, but not really with any specific guidance, some really good intentions. I ended up spending the summer doing some work for my administrator to start that SALT team that I mentioned before. And while doing so, I created this learning scale, which was, very similar to the BC proficiency scale and modeled a lot after the same type of proficiency scale that's being used with the elementary teachers. I was really proud of the scale. It was going to be instrumental in going gradeless with my school. I pitched it to admin. They ate it up. I fed it to staff. It was put in place. And grade 7, 9 teachers are going gradeless. And this scale was how to do it. It would be the answer to how going gradeless would be easy in a nice, neat little package. Okay. So, but competency tracking, simple, but it wasn't simple and it wasn't easy. And actually forcing the scale on teachers ended up being kind of like what, Katie White writes about in Softening the Edges. It ended up being like this sharp edge. And I noticed it, even though, I in my class, when you're, at the helm of some kind of a progressive movement, you're able to talk the talk with your kids and you think that they're eating it up. And I had, you're marking and you're assessing using a learning scale. But you find yourself then, actually, labeling work with the levels in the learning scale. And I had this moment, this low moment where, handing back work to a group of kids. I had a group of Humanities 8 students. And one young man received his paper and it had, developing written up on the top. And he looked over at another student and asked, well, what did you get? And he said, well, I got, proficient. Oh, what did you get? I got developing. Oh, that's okay. Developing is like a B. You're good. And my jaw just hit the floor, because this is exactly what you don't want when you're trying to go gradeless. But what was happening is that the kids were actually taking the learning scale and translating it into grades. And so this reaction from the students was exactly the same as if I had labeled their work with a number. It was this low point that seemed to, illuminate my worst fears. So I questioned what I was doing. I questioned why I had introduced the scale. I was frustrated that not all teachers were on the same page as me. I'd had this romantic vision for gradeless, and it felt like it was crashing and burning. But you take these low points, which, you have to, lemons make lemonade out of lemons, and really kind of use that as, you have to think about, okay, what's gone wrong here? What is it that I need to do? And have to really think all this. And so I realized that I had to stop feeling sorry for myself, and I had to keep blogging, and I needed to communicate the pedagogy behind it more. I knew the pedagogy, but it's difficult to communicate that with teachers, because you also don't want to step on their autonomy, right? These are some fabulous educators, and to ask them to make a big, bold shift and change the thinking, what goes on in the classroom, it can be a really tough sell. But you just have to roll with the punches and be really, really reflective. And I think that's why I blog, because I want to reflect on my practice all the time.
That is so healthy, and I can't agree more that just the act of blogging forces us to be reflective on our own practice and our own, yeah, every decision that we make in the classroom, including reporting and assessment, in a way that if we aren't blogging, maybe we aren't taking that same time, and we're just sort of going with the flow. So I want to back this up a little bit, and I'm thinking for teachers who are maybe not familiar with what we're talking about here in terms of a grading against a scale. In my context, it looks very similar, and maybe the terminology is slightly different. But in my 8th grade context, most of the work that I assess, it goes against a scale of emerging, developing, proficient, and extending. Are the words any different in your context?
Oh, only slightly. We have emerging, beginning, developing, applying, and extending. So basically, if we're going to put it into context, our scale at our school is basically, if you take a look at what beginning is, that's like the ministry's emerging. and our applying is the same as the ministry's proficient. So I know even when I communicate on beyond report cards or whatever, I'm always cognizant of that. And the only reason I actually developed the scale in that five levels is because that's what they've been using in the elementary school. So I thought, if kids are coming up from, grade 7 into high school, they are already familiar with that language, and why shift it? So, I mean, and it could change.
It is so refreshing to hear you wrestle with. I mean, I love that story that you shared about that student who was talking about, well, what did you get, to another student, and they said, "Oh, I got developing." And Shannon, I even see my students when we ask them to do, term end reflective kind of writing, and they say, a major moment of victory for me this term, or a moment that I celebrate, was getting an extending or getting a proficient. And when they use that language is really important. It's very telling, because when they frame it that way, they're actually not thinking about it in terms of, oh, my skills, or I demonstrated proficiency. So they're not, and maybe that language is, I would like to think we can expect that of 13, 14-year-olds, but they're saying, I got a proficient, I got an extending. And you're absolutely right. They're just treating those scales as grades. So how do we, and this is a tough question, but how do we as educators really embed that language, or how do we take students to that place where they see them not as marks or validation in the traditional grading sense, but actually as skill development on a continuum? How do we get there?
Well, first of all, I think the learning scale is really, really important, especially when it comes to things like tracking. Okay. I think that's really important. But if we're actually going to see growth, we need to take away the labels as we're assessing work in the classroom. I think to go to a feedback only structure and get rid of all of the labels. I mean, it's okay, track using the proficiency scale. I think that's a great way to kind of keep track of students' progress. But I think it's more important that we just go with a feedback only type assessment practice for sure. I think that's the way to go, because again, that that revelation, like seeing that kid say, "I got a developing, it's just like a B." It's like, well, then what's the point of doing this? And we have to be careful. Some people would argue that, well, we can use those labels, whether the BC ministry, the ministry ones, or the ones that we're using in our district, and then also give feedback. But studies have shown, there's a lot of research behind this, that as soon as you give any kind of evaluative type label and feedback, they're not going to look at the feedback. They're not. Dylan William will talk about that. Katie White will talk about that. It's that's why I think it's really important to go. Let's just not worry about that. It's a great way to track, but let's just worry about giving them the feedback.
I completely agree. I'm moving that way, and I haven't followed completely in my own practice. I'll be honest. I still use some of those labels, and maybe out of habit, or feeling like I need to. But I know, I spoke with Trevor McKenzie, and I know you're familiar with his work, and he talked about, he works within a tradition, more of a traditional grading model in Victoria, but he talks about, I think he said he only gives back feedback to his students, and I think they only see letter grades or labels on the report card, and he just refuses to give anything else back.
And it's incredibly powerful for kids. For some reason, there seems to be this kids, it's like flipping a switch. Since they come from elementary school, which goes with, it's pretty much gradeless, right? Like they use the learning scales in elementary, they go into high school, and suddenly there's this mindset that it's all about chasing this letter grade. And I think, again, we get rid of the labels and we just go to feedback. I said it really, really powerful. But you bring up something that's really, really important, is you got to communicate with kids about when you decide to go gradeless. Like, you can't just make the shift. Like, having that conversation with students is incredibly powerful. With my English 11 new media this semester. So I was really nervous about going gradeless with a group of seniors. They had never had any exposure to gradeless as far as I knew. And one of the first things I did, on a day, on the first day I had them in classes, I put two questions up on the board. What do you expect from education, and or educators, and what do educators expect from you? And they just lit up with all of this feedback. They are overwhelmed. They have jobs, they play sports, they feel like they're not being listened to. And then, it went back and forth, and it just segued so beautifully into, wouldn't it be nice to take a breath and go, hey, let's not make this about carrots and sticks. Let's actually, look at our progress. Let's not compete against. Let's not have you guys compete against each other. How about I give you feedback, and how about, I give you multiple opportunities to grow on a learning scale, and not, again, not worry about competing with each other, and chase those letter grades. And you could see them almost all just exhale, like, really, we don't have to worry about this now. So they really embraced it. They really embraced it. Yeah.
And this is such a huge question right now in so many states where governors have said, educators cannot downgrade any student's mark. And so the question has come up from so many educators and jurisdictions, if we can't, if we don't have grades to incentivize learning, what is there to motivate students to work or to learn? And that's kind of first of all, a sad commentary on where we are in K to 12 education, if that's kind of the conclusion. But yeah, getting away from, I just like the word, dangling these A's in front of students as the wage that, as their only motivation. I think we have to move past that. I keep thinking back to my master's program, Shannon, at VIU, where I learned for 2 years and I did not receive a single letter grade or percentage. And I think, what was it really that motivated all of us? I mean, I think in a short answer, all of my 45 classmates, we believed in the mission, all right? We believed in the pathway. We believed in the professional growth, the development. And yes, the certification is important as well. And somehow we need to bring some of that spirit into K to 12 education. I want to ask you one more question here, and I know I've parked on this for a long time, but do you ever feel like you talked about getting rid of the labels? Do you ever feel like we could just move K to 12 education toward a pass fail model?
Oh boy, that's a big question. I really liked Ken O'Connor's letter that he wrote, on behalf of the Canadian Assessment for Learning, in which he talked about, having pass fail, and, maybe pass with distinction. I think it's not about those grades at the end of the line. I think what needs to happen is those letter grades need to be the afterthought after the learning has culminated at the end of a course, instead of being this big dark cloud looming over kids and over teachers, that's what they're striving for. So sure, I could say, sure, let's have pass fail and pass with distinction, and I appreciate that. But at the end of the line, I think it needs to go deeper than that. I think if we just switch the end goal and get rid of A, B, and C plus, and just have pass fail and pass with distinction, that kind of thing, it's not getting to the root of what I think is a problem in classrooms. It is about, making it more student centered, more feedback oriented, and not worrying about grades. Um, so, like I said, I think, sure, that would be great, but I think there's a greater underlying problem that's in the classroom that needs to be tweaked. And I have these teachers they're fabulous teachers, and they're doing such amazing work. And I think there's just these little things that we can change, in the way in which we're grading, that can do so much for kids.
So true. Well, Shannon, let's talk about Beyond Report Cards, your legendary Facebook group that now boasts almost 1,400 passionate educators and it continues to grow. What fuels your passion for the area of assessment in education? And in particular, what motivated you to start and continue to maintain such an awesome group?
Oh, I created Beyond Report Cards because there really wasn't a platform I'd found for BC educators to talk about assessment and the renewed curriculum. I had been on great platforms like I love Teachers Going Gradeless, and I love my PLN on Twitter. So big shout out to my BC Ed chat folks. My PLN absolutely keeps me going on this journey. And at one point, I felt like there is so much positive energy to follow your passion when you find a group of educators who support you and share your educational pedagogy. But I knew that there had to be other BC educators out there who wanted to talk about this. And holy smokes, it just took off. And I literally created it over the course of just a couple of days. I had thought about it for a long time, but I went, okay, let's just do this. Got on my computer, made a logo, and I went, that's it. I'm going to start this group. And I'm blown away. There's like hundreds of educators within a few days. And so my passion for assessment comes from kids and what's best for kids. I think assessment isn't about what the teacher does to students, right? But more about what we can do to bring out the best in kids. And, we already talked about how, when, you were doing your professional development, your training, how you, there was no, there was no letter grade, dangling over you. That wasn't what you were striving for. And that comes, my assessment background, was a lot of me reflecting on what was happening in my drama class. I've been teaching drama for over 15 years. And when you are teaching these elective courses, it's all about that descriptive feedback in the class. And these kids don't care about letter grades. And even the kids who are have to take these courses, these elective courses, because that's what they need to graduate. They need to have certain courses. So it just made me think, why can't this happen in academics? There should not be this dichotomy. There shouldn't be this where, it's this almost this gradeless mindset with the electives and not in the academics. This could work. So, and I think assessment is the cornerstone of that process. And I grew up in a culture that, again, encouraged carrots and sticks. All that I ever did was encourage students to shoot for that grade, not for learning. And so it is just so beautiful. That's the fuel for me. It's so beautiful to see a child aim for their personal best, to use feedback and improve themselves and not be concerned about what grade they're getting. They're not worried about who they are competing with. And I really feel right to my core that assessment can actually change the culture of our schools when we change our assessment practices. And there's a huge social emotional component, and that just fires me up.
I love it. I love it when it brings out that passion in you. And I completely agree, of course. I think assessment is at the center of everything. I mean, I don't know when it was when this clicked for me, but you start to, when you really pay attention to assessment, I mean, go to a 2-day assessment conference. I attended the Canadian Assessment for Learning conference last year, and you start sitting in these sessions. Oh, phenomenal. You start sitting in these sessions and you realize, wow, this is the center of every decision we make in our schools around learning. Yeah, completely agree. So again, as I said at the top, if you are not connected to Beyond Report Cards, make sure you connect with Shannon there. There is a tremendous community building around assessment and that conversation. And it's not limited to British Columbia either. It's educators from all over. Well, I've got a couple of questions for you, Shannon, that I know you've seen on Twitter. I opened it up to some of our professional learning network. Josh Ogilvie at Josh Ogilvie 4 on Twitter, a teacher in Burnaby, British Columbia, asked this question: how can we help teachers develop and use sound and aligned assessment and grading practices? And I know before you answer, Beyond Report Cards is a big part of that, obviously, but yeah, how would you attack this one?
Oh boy. So it's a great question. Good job, Josh. That was a great one. Um, I think first and foremost, and I learned this one early on when I developed the learning scale and introduced it to my staff, is we need to support teachers who want to shift their assessment practices. And it's really important that we meet teachers where they're at. So if we push teachers too much and too quickly, it's easy to become frustrated and they just want to pack it in. Okay. For those of us who are gradeless, right, for example, or you doing a standards based type model, we need to remember what our first steps were and the support we received moving forward. But thinking about what is this ideal set of steps or criteria, if you will, to establish aligned assessment, my advice to teachers wanting to develop this is about making one or more of the following changes. I think it has to do with, again, I've said it before, don't consider letter grades until the end of the learning. As soon as you kind of leave that out of the conversation until the end of the line, that's a big change that can really, really benefit kids. Focus. The second thing is focusing on the curricular competencies. Teachers who've been around for a while, if they're still used to the old curriculum, was very content oriented, and now we're more it's more skill oriented. So as soon as we change our focus on competencies, that changes things as well. Using backwards design to plan lessons, assignments, and projects with those competencies in mind. So that's another thing. Use that feedback only model of assessment with kids. So, and that means, and it's enlightening. It's like a breath of air. Like, this isn't, it's scary to get rid of what we're used to and putting numbers and grades and stuff at the top of the page. But when we move to just feedback oriented, kids will take that feedback, and then if you give them time to actually apply that feedback, they will always grow. So if you want kids to actually improve in skill areas, you need to go to that feedback model. And the other thing is I think it's really important to track growth, especially using triangulation, observations, conversations, and products, using that a common type proficiency scale. Um, Again, I can't. It's so refreshing to focus on the competencies. That's what I really, really like about the renewed curriculum. It opens up so many possibilities for engaging and exciting work with kids. I mean, content is important. Tom Schimmer and others, they'll talk about content is important. It's the foundation. It's that grade level content that increases the levels of sophistication of the curricular competencies. But when we shift to how can kids get better at a skill, we soon realize that tests and worksheets don't necessarily cut it. And we can start playing around with a lot of projects and project-based learning. And then we don't impede this growth mindset culture. And if we don't slap numbers and levels on work. So we've got all of this skill building, and we're not worrying about numbers and letter grades, but we're still able to track, but that's in a way that allows us to still feel some element of control. It's just a different looking grade book for sure.
I love that. And I think about what you're saying in terms of competencies. Is it fair to say we're trying to reframe learning more around what kids are doing instead of what they are knowing?
That's
Is that
exactly.
a fair, that's oversimplified maybe, but yeah. And within that environment of doing, we want to say, okay, kids, here's the learning. Here are our targets. Here's where we want to, the learning destination. By the way, you're not going to be judged with a number every step of the way. And that's part of the problem, I think, with the traditional model, that when kids are told that every move they make, every piece of paper they touch will be graded or given a percentage, then I'm going to use what you said earlier about the dark cloud. Then the dark cloud of fear and intimidation is there.
Yeah. And again, if you come back to even something like a learning scale, because there's a lot of teachers who will argue with me and go, well, I don't see how that's any different than letter grades. I'm like, well, if you're using it to track and you're only giving feedback, that's more empowering to kids, because like that young man that I was talking about who had the conversation, that was it. He hit the wall. When he found out developing was a B, he's like, well, I'm good. I don't need to do anything else. So the same thing, right? Well, right. And that's exactly what you don't want. And the same thing can happen, I think, with extending. If we're looking at the proficiency scale in terms of letter grades, and then kids kind of wrap their head around that, even if they get to extending, they're going to think, oh, good, I got an A, I'm good now, right? But I like to share actually with teachers. Actually, when I do a workshop, I actually show them the learning scale. And if you go with a feedback only model, even those kids who are at extending, you have to then stay on your toes and then give them the kind of feedback that they can, you know, actually still grow as a learner. So, if you actually look at even the ministry proficiency scale, you can think of it more as emerging, developing, proficient, extending, 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 extending. It can be this limitless thing. And you know what? I got kids who are doing probably above grade level stuff, and they don't care about where they're at on the proficiency scale. As long as you give them feedback and you give them time to apply that feedback, it's so awesome.
Some of the most thrilling moments I've had in the last few years, and I've only been gradeless for 2 or 3 years, I think 3 years in total between two different schools. But and to anyone listening, if you're on the verge of this kind of a model, a gradeless paradigm, try asking your students to reflect on their level of proficiency and then justify it. That will lead to some incredible writing. And so I give my students these three big questions, I call them, of what are you learning? How is that going? And where to next? And we do that every Friday, and they choose different learning targets from the week. And they talk about how they are doing, and they in those terms of proficiency levels. And so, I'll read about, well, right now my skills are developing in this area, and here's why, and here's where I'm struggling, and here's what I need to do to move forward. And you think you have this moment of, oh my goodness, in the traditional model, they never had those opportunities. It was a very passive stance, and maybe there were educators in traditional grading models giving that opportunity for reflection, but that wasn't my experience as a student and as a teacher. And I'll put my hand up for sure and say that. And man, when you look at the power of putting students in the driver's seat and really giving them ownership over this process, it is so inspiring. Gives me goosebumps.
And it's that self-reflective self-assessment piece. It's not the same as if we were just going to give them a rubric and say highlight where you think you're at. Actually getting them to write and think about their learning, it's huge. Star Saxton wrote it's a little book, and it's all about how to get students to self-assess. It is fabulous, and she gets her students, if they'll do some kind of a powerful project, and then they're writing almost an essay, critically and creatively thinking about their learning, about, that actual process of learning. And that is so powerful. That is high level thinking. And that's really, really important. Yeah, I love the self-assessment piece for sure. Yeah.
I've got another question from Twitter for you, Shannon. This one comes from our mutual friend and kind of a rock star here in BC education, Rose Pillay at rpillay1. And she asks, how can teachers outside of your district benefit from your work, words, wit, and wisdom beyond the blog and beyond Twitter?
I love Rose. She's so amazing. I I love that. The four W's. Wow. Oh, I'm so flattered. I think Rose is, oh God, Rose is awesome. Um, so the last 16 months, I've been it's been a whirlwind. I've been really busy. I started blogging. I wrote a piece for Aaron Blackwelder for Teachers Going Gradeless. I started Beyond Report Cards. I just recently wrote a piece about 20 time project based learning for BC Teacher Magazine, and a piece for the Canadian Assessment for Learning newsletter. In the midst of all that I've done, I just started doing some workshops this year, right? And that's been a really important thing when I talk about when I'm being really, really reflective. It's really important. I started doing workshops uh, for educators just to talk about where I'm going and what's working and what isn't working. And the other thing I've been doing is I've had educators actually reaching out to me, and we've had these great coffee chats, and where we sit down at the coffee shop and have a conversation about where they're at. And often these teachers are reaching out to me because they've read something in either my blog or on Beyond Report Cards. And most of the time these folks want to talk to me because they feel like they're not doing enough, and in the midst of these conversations I get to illuminate for them what I think they're doing so well. Right, I learn a lot even from them, but then we sit down one on one and create these wonderful plans for next steps. So I'd love to do more of that, right? Like, I'll be honest, I haven't really considered, what potentially this could look like for me outside of the district. But I would love the idea of doing something, well, depending, post pandemic, or even within the confines of pandemic, something, virtually. I think, if there's educators from around the province who want to chat me up and we'll figure something out, I'd love to. I'm all for that. I love sharing it. Otherwise, that's definitely my goal, is to spread the word about words of about going gradeless. I think it'd be great. Yeah, for sure.
I'm hearing consultancy there, Shannon, and maybe that is in your future. Who knows? But
Woo!
seriously, I mean, I think a lot of districts are grappling with this problem or with this challenge of how do we move our assessment models forward. And that transition is terrifying, right? For a lot of administrators, for teachers, it's difficult to bring to a parent community and get them on board. And the transition can be ugly in some districts. But having someone with your passion and your expertise and as well read as you are, and in all of the conversations that you're in, I think you bring a lot of value. So I'm going to put that plug in for Shannon. If you're exactly where I just described in your district, keep her in mind. Well, Shannon, we are living and working in an incredible time for the planet and for education. In recent weeks, we've heard governors and premiers in many jurisdictions basically prohibiting grading out of concern for pervasive inequities between learners, right? Urging educators simply to provide feedback that moves learning forward, which is music to our ears. So, my question to you is this: do you feel like just maybe we are on the brink of an assessment revolution in North America?
It's blowing my mind. I'll sit in these online conferences with our district supervisors, and and the conversation is there saying, we're going just formative feedback and no grades, and then at the end of the year, though, then we have to give a grade, but don't be grading things as you're working. And it blows my mind. It's awesome, right? When I'm hearing about this, but here's the thing. And again, it's about how we word, I guess, this assessment revolution, right? uh, a fabulous educator in front of mine, and I know you know her as well, Christian Younghusband, right, gave me some really sage advice one evening. We were out for dinner, and I was having one of those days where I was, oozing with frustration about different, wanting educators to embrace more of a gradeless philosophy, because sometimes you get kind of fixated on those who maybe aren't, right, instead of those who are, right. So she keeps me real, let me tell you. So she told me this, and I carry this with me now all the time when I'm talking to educators about gradeless and about assessment. Okay, it's this 2060 rule, and it's the top 20% of educators are living and breathing gradeless. These are the folks who don't need convincing that gradeless and student-centered learning is the bomb. Okay, it's awesome for them. The lower 20% are those who are less inclined to budge from their position no matter what. These are fabulous educators, lovely humans. They've got their way, and that's it. Then there's the 60% of teachers in the middle, right, who have dipped their toes and want to know more. They've been experimenting with some gradeless, maybe watching with, a keen interest from the sidelines. I think what remote learning is doing is this. Those top 20%, they're looking at this remote learning, teaching as a way to strut their stuff, saying, gradeless, no problem. I've been training for this. Watch me work. I get it. It won't be easy, but I've got it. I've got it. I can roll with this. The bottom 20% are going to, still question why we can't grade and, maybe expect more, why can't we expect more from kids during a crisis? And it's the 60%. When we talk about an assessment revolution, so that's 60% in the center. In the middle, this is their opportunity to see the impact of formative assessment and going gradeless and how it can have this positive impact now that it's been mandated, right? They've been told, take grades out of the equation. So this is their opportunity. So they've been hearing me, they've been hearing others talk about how awesome this is. And because it's now, principals and superintendents are pushing for it, is this group that has this opportunity to take a first spin. So my hope, so when we talk about assessment revolution, that's the group I think that again will take this opportunity and take the time to have these conversations now with other educators. And whenever they return to the building, whenever that is going to be, with maybe more confidence to move gradeless for sure. Yeah.
Well, it's such an exciting time in K to 12 education. It's awesome. Like, it's so unbelievable how much learning has happened even in the last month. And of course, I'm talking about assessment, but I'm also talking about all of the ed tech tools that and platforms and apps. I mean, I keep going back to the story of Russ Richmond. He was a pottery teacher in Oregon and, completely no tech. And then this crisis forced him into using Google Classroom and Flipgrid, and he's embraced the challenge and his practice has been transformed. And he says when he goes back to normal classroom, he'll have these great tools where he can record instructions and do so much more in terms of sharing. And so I think that is happening across North America, across the world. But yes, going back to your point, I think it's almost like the political sphere where we have these persuadables right in the middle. We have the 20%
Right.
persuaded
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
the 20% that will never be persuaded. But we do have this group in the middle that, and I'm sure there are some great leadership terms that apply to what we're talking about, but we have this group that is checking it out right now and that is playing with these new principles. And so I think it is a phenomenal time, very exciting. And I like how you frame that. Well, Shannon, we've spent all of our time so far talking about assessment. As you look across your PLN and your own practice in the remote learning environment, what else is setting you on fire about education right now?
Oh, I just love how much educators are willing to share right now. I go on Twitter every day, a few times a day. I love how people are using structures like Twitter and Facebook to share what's going well and what isn't going well on their journey, what they're doing in their classrooms. I'm constantly inspired by all of the stories and how teachers are coping with remote learning. And I use the word coping because I don't think anyone's thriving teaching remotely. I think, but they're invested into making sure that kids get the most out of this, and they're investing hours and hours of their time, and it really is, it's phenomenal. Then they're so worried that they aren't communicating student learning and progress and they're coming up with such creative ways to keep kids engaged in learning. And sometimes I'll go on Twitter, and this is kind of frustrating because I'll see the odd tweet, and I know you've seen it too, where someone, is like, "Hey, teachers, stop sharing how well remote learning is going because it's not the truth." And, and I'm just like, "No, please keep sharing." It lifts you up. It's just awesome. When I'm having this down day where I'm having a hard time, connecting with kids, and I'm firing off texts, and I'm trying to phone, and kids don't seem quite engaged, and they're probably having a down. I go on Twitter and I see what's working really well for educators. I love it. I want a piece of that pie. It gives me hope.
Oh, and I know you preach the same message that I keep telling educators. I mean, you've got a message with value. If you are in the profession, if you are working with kids, you've got value to share with others. Just talk about how things are going. Talk about celebrate those wins and share those defeats, share those struggles because we are obviously, I mean, it almost goes without saying, there's so much isolation right now. that we've got educators tuning in to professional learning networks, joining Facebook groups like Beyond Report Cards, checking out Twitter, checking out Instagram, joining these conversations. So absolutely, if you are a non-sharer, if you're listening to this and you haven't shared your message and your experience, I'm with Shannon. It's an exciting time. Just start writing and sharing what's going on.
Yeah, totally.
Shannon, how are you looking to grow professionally and improve your practice right now? Can you share with us about maybe a specific professional goal that you have in front of you or a project that you're currently working on?
Oh, I read a lot. I something crosses my path, obviously about assessment. I'm always reading. I'm always watching different webinars. I feel like I am so invested in this assessment culture that I have this obligation to myself and others to keep working on my practice and sharing what I'm learning. And it's really important that for me to, embrace whatever kind of crosses my path, that I want to hear somebody else's point of view. I read other blogs and that kind of thing. I'm never ever quite settled in my practice. I'm always learning. It's always very fluid for me. It's it's a bit of a curse, I find. Like I'll hear about something new. I'll read about something new. And instead of just reading going, oh, that's interesting. Okay, moving on. I am always thinking about, okay, how can I put this in place? A few months ago we had Sandra Herbst. Oh my gosh, so awesome. Came and did a presentation for teachers. And I literally left the room and just wanted to apply what I had learned there on co-constructing criteria with kids and put my own spin on it. So because she just blew my mind. It was so great. So when I read or view something and there's a practicality, I switch into overdrive and I look for ways to implement it in my practice right now. And so I'm not I'm not a preacher of just progressive teaching and assessment. I live it. So I think I don't have maybe a concrete goal, like, and except to say that I'm going to keep blogging and I'm going to keep reading. I'm going to keep investing my time so I can I can preach what I'm practicing, so to speak. So, because I'm actually doing it, and I want to keep doing that for sure. I've dabbled in some. I put the word out there actually on Beyond Report Cards about possibly taking Beyond Report Cards to Twitter and starting some BRC type chats and that kind of thing. I think I'm going to hold off on that maybe for a little while yet, because I think teachers are pretty invested in trying to just get through this year. But that's something that I think might be quite interesting to bring that to Twitter. Yeah.
I It's so interesting right now. I do think there's a range of emotional health right now among educators. And you're right. I think a lot of us, maybe the majority of educators, are just trying to survive. But I do talk to educators who say, yeah, I'm finding my rhythm. I'm in a good place. There are even, Shannon, some educators, and zero judgment on these educators, obviously. I think it was Mandy Freilich sharing on her podcast recently that there are some educators who are quietly saying, look, this is my sweet spot. This is where I'm happiest. I'm fully devoted to supporting my learners online, and I can, I have all of this time. I can operate on my own comfort level, and I'm just really enjoying this experience of fully investing in the remote learning. And you know what? Maybe for some educators, they're going to, through this experience, they're going to find that new path. And yeah, so I would say, I mean, back to your Twitter chat idea, there might be an opportunity to start that now. But at any rate, we'll look forward to that. I know there are some other good ones. Have you ever joined the hashtag @assessment conversation?
All the time. All the time.
I
All the
figured.
time.
Dumb question. Dumb
It's
question.
oh, no, no, no. It's oh, I love it. I get tagged by Katie all the time
Yeah.
when she does the biweekly chats, and
Hmm.
they're so great. And it is hard because you have to almost literally set an alarm,
Right.
on your phone to be ready to kind of chunk that hour and get into it. But even if someone doesn't have the time to actually, comment and be part of in the chat, I always then take the next day and I just look for the hashtag, and I'm always looking at what the conversation has been on Twitter. I've actually gotten into this habit on Beyond Report Cards where I'll actually take, screenshots of really cool tweets from those assessment chats and post them on Facebook once a week and go, here's some like Wednesday musings off of Twitter, with the hope that maybe that'll actually, entice some folks to get there and get onto Twitter and be part of those chats. It's really awesome.
There is a way, and I think Rose does this and perhaps some others. I know you can use the moments feature in Twitter to sort of curate highlights from a particular hashtag, and I've never done that, but you're getting me
Me
thinking
too.
that yeah, I should go through that. And you hit on a really important point that even if we can't participate in a chat in real time, there's nothing stopping us from lining up that hashtag and make sure your Twitter app is set to, I think we want recent, not top tweets, right? So if you go recent, then it'll arrange them chronologically, and then you just follow through that chat chronologically as it happened, and you just respond. And some call it a slow chat, right? You're just sort of throwing on your comments, and there's nothing wrong with that either. So
Mhm. Well, and I think that's that's actually even the nice thing about, and that's why I chose Facebook for Beyond Report Cards, is because it is that opportunity, that slow chat. I think, I find I do the majority of the posts, and a lot of some other teachers then will post and the conversation will start. And I think there's a lot of teachers who just want to take a breath and go in and just have a look and see, some of the articles and webinars and stuff that are posted on there. And so, yeah, it's like a nice slow chat.
outside of education, Shannon, what's another area of learning for you? What is it that ignites your passions outside of the classroom and really brings you alive as a human being?
Oh, I love watching TED Talks. I'm kind of obsessed with TED Talks, and I am a movie nut. I love, like, I get to like Oscar time. I watch all the Best Picture nominees, and I'm always quite. I love to. One of my favorite categories for the Academy Awards is actually the best short animated feature, and sometimes I'll actually even bring them into the classroom and I'll chat with the kids about what makes these, such poignant little films. Um, and I know you mentioned early on, I have done some acting. I acted a lot in high school, and now in the last 5 years I've been part of a few productions. So that's been a great way to kind of take a break from what's going on, in my learning assessment and that kind of thing, is to, take a break and watching movies and watching TED Talks and doing some acting when I have the time to invest in it, for sure.
Now, when you say you are acting, are you engaging in your own high school musicals and productions, or are you acting somewhere else?
Oh no, it's actually, there's we have a great community theater called Nechako Theatrics Society, and they put on shows two or more times a year. So no, it's actually community theater. So I end up taking 2 or 3 nights a week and working on shows. Last year they did. I was. The deliciously evil Mrs. Boynton in Agatha Christie's Appointment with Death, and that was a super fun part to play. I just loved it. It was so She was so awful. It was just a really really fun kind of part to play. But they do some fantastic shows, and it's a little theater group. It's We perform in a place, where there's only about, anywhere between 50 and 100 seats, so it's so awesome. They're just an amazing group of folks. I know they were planning on doing 12th night, and I think that's been put on hold now, unfortunately. But I'm excited to do something with them in the future, for sure.
I think that's so important as an educator to remain engaged outside of the school context in an area of passion, and then you end up bringing that fire back into your classroom, and your students really benefit. So you're walking the walk, and that's really cool. Shannon, share about a personal habit or a productivity hack that contributes to your success. How do you get it all done?
Wow. Well, First of all, I'm really lucky because I don't have little kids, so I don't have to worry about, making sure, I can sit in my room and write for hours, because, my kids are, my daughter's grade 10, and she's really independent. She's awesome. And my son is, just finished his second year at UNBC, so they're older, so I'm able to just invest in that time. And I know that's not everybody has that opportunity, but I think if I'm going to give anybody advice who's interested in doing any kind of writing, and I don't at all think I'm an expert, I've only been blogging for just like over a year, but I would say that write when you're inspired to write. So if something is firing you up, just go for it. Don't wait, and write from the heart, write from your gut, use your own voice. When I first started blogging, I was trying to write formal essays. And of course, you still want, I'm an English teacher, right? There's still some technicality to writing your blog, but you got to write what you feel. And it's not going to please everybody, but get it out there. You do have to, you make yourself very vulnerable when you do that, but get it out there, share your story, especially if you're on any kind of an educational journey, like an assessment journey, like Gradeless. Share your story because people want an honest view of what's going on. They don't want folks to dance over it and gloss over it and just talk about what's good. They want to hear it. They want to hear it all. And I think that's really important. Yeah, just write from your gut. Take big chunks of time and just write what you feel.
That is great advice. I think perfectionism stops 95% of educators from creating and sharing. Just this idea, this huge fear, right? That I can't put out something that, as you said, will expose me. But then as a result, unfortunately, sadly, we don't get to hear the ideas that would so enrich the community. So I'm going to echo what Shannon just said. Get it out there. And once you've got that creation process in place, you'll get better at your craft. You really will. Well, Shannon, it is time for your quick picks. And here we want to know the education voices and resources that are shaping your practice and inspiring your thinking today. So, starting at Twitter, tell us about someone we should follow there and share why they've been inspiring you lately.
Oh, there's so many. But Monty Siri, who is a Washington educator, he's just amazing. He introduced the world to Smiles and Frowns, where you get kids to share in the classroom, what's good and what's bad, what's going on. It's a sharing and connecting and community building exercise. It has changed the dynamic of my class. He also does something called hashtag my room message. He despises letter grades. He despises letter grades. And his desire to connect with kids is deeply personal to him. Like, and you feel his tweets. You don't just read his tweets. You feel his tweets, and it resonates with me because his journey has had such a positive impact on me, and wanting to continue on with my journey for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to second that. We'll have to look up his handle here, but Monty Syrie, Montessyrie, and he tweets and posts his board messages. You mentioned that briefly, and they are always
He
so
does
moving.
his he does his sappy sigh rhymes, and they're so awesome. They're fun, right? Like, he's so connected with kids. He's just a beautiful person.
Yeah, and his handle is just his name, Monty Syrie. So you'll find him there on Twitter. Shannon, point us to an ed tech tool that you currently love using, maybe in the remote learning environment.
Oh, well, I'm a fresh grader. I've started fresh grading the last few years, and that's been fantastic, especially in remote learning. I also really like Dropbox. I'm a fairly new Dropbox user. I'm not a big ed tech user. Like, it's not foreign to me. I just haven't used it. But yeah, Dropbox and fresh grade for sure. Yeah, I love it. Materials, lessons, and projects on Dropbox. I love it. It's great.
Recommend a book, maybe one that you've been reading lately, or one of your all time faves that's really been deeply influential.
Hmm. Okay, so I have more than one. Like I have more than one. I can't help it. I can't help it. There's more than one. I promise it's not like 10 or anything like that. Okay, so if you're interested in assessment, I would say the first book you should pick up is something called Hacking Assessment, which is 10 Ways to Go Gradeless in a Traditional Grade School by Star Saxton. It's awesome. It's my go-to book. It's fantastic to do that. I also love Katie White's Softening the Edges. And a great pandemic read is actually not an assessment one, is Kids These Days by Jodie Carrington. And she focuses on connection and really solidly appreciates the work that educators do with kids. And reading it over the last few weeks when you can have these really low points in remote teaching and learning really filled my cup. And I'm so inspired. I'm taking her online course here over the next few weeks. It's fantastic.
Shannon, are you a podcast listener? I'd love to hear a yes on that. Obviously, we want to shout out everyone listening to us and joining in this conversation right now on Teachers on Fire. If you are a listener, tell us about one that you've got at the top of your deck.
I love Shelley Moore's podcasts. I think those of you know who Shelley Moore is. Everyone knows who Shelley Moore is. But she's an inclusive educator, speaker, writer, fantastic. I just think the more we embrace the direction she's taking with inclusive education, the more dynamic and amazing our classrooms could be. I love listening to the podcast for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, great message. And then tell us about a YouTube channel that you are subscribed to, one that you either find valuable in your practice or just amusing.
Oh, I have to say that's 5 more minutes. So, watching watching the YouTube channel, her Shelley Moore's YouTube channel, the 5 more minutes, and then listening to the subsequent podcasts. They're just fantastic. My favorite podcast, especially that's got that real assessment bite to it, is a great one that she just did this year. It's called Napoleon Schmomolian. I just love her titles. They're so great. And it's my favorite. And it talks about how it's by keeping forwards design, which is like it's an old school colonial design. We need to ditch that and embrace backwards design and triangulation to collect student evidence of learning. And what she has to say is directly connected to my pedagogy, because her focus is on putting kids center stage and learning. So it's really, really great. Napoleon Schmomolian, check it out.
We never go wrong by putting kids first, right? Last question, Shannon, just for fun, and this really is the season in the quarantine world right now. We're let's face it, we're all on Netflix. We're all binging this and that. What have you got on your list right now?
I have been rewatching The Crown. I love Olivia Colman, and I'm also rewatching Fleabag on Amazon because I love Phoebe Waller-Bridge. She's so funny, and she's a great writer and performer.
Shannon, this has been fantastic. For those interested in your message on assessment and, of course, beyond report cards on Facebook, what are the best ways for the listeners to follow you and get in touch?
All right. Follow me on Twitter at Drama Queen BRC. You can follow me, come visit my blog at mygrowthmindset.home.blog. And of course, my 2 Facebook pages, Beyond Report Cards and The Humanities Zone. And if you'd like to Vox with me, my handle is Growth Mindset Drama Queen.
Sounds good, Shannon. Again, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time so generously with the podcast today. This has been fun. It's been inspiring. I know we're going to have more conversations forward. So take care, stay safe, and let's talk again soon.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Thanks, Tim.
Before we sign off today, I'd like to share some highlights from the Teachers on Fire community. Our first stop is on Twitter, where Jenny B at Lula Educate tweeted, "This section reminds me of a Teachers on Fire podcast where Jesus 1979, that's at Jesus 1979, teaches STEAM and has students engineer prosthetics. Love that this spins the hashtag dumpster projects into useful innovation. Yes, education has changed. Hashtag PBL, hashtag engaged learning." Well, thank you so much for sharing these connections, Jenny. She's referring here, of course, to episode 134, where I featured Jesus Huerta, and that episode continues to get a great response. If you missed that one, make sure to give it a listen. Again, that's episode 134. To all who have read, viewed, liked, retweeted, commented, or replied to my content on Twitter or any other platform, thank you so much. You are the fuel to my fire, and I so appreciate your support. Did you know that I've started vlogging this year on YouTube? That's right, vlogging with a V. Recently, I've published a few vlogs on the topics of resource curation, revolutions in assessment, and reasons why you should start an educational podcast. Check out Teachers on Fire on YouTube and subscribe to see more from me there. I ran a Twitter poll recently, and I'd like to share the results. From my @MrKV account, I tweeted, "This morning, the British Columbia government announced an optional and part-time return to school with caps on daily class sizes starting June 1st. So my question was, parents, if given the chance, would you send your children back to school in June? And the options were yes, no, I'd wait for the fall, or maybe I need more info. And the final tallies, actually I shouldn't say final, there's still a day left as of today or as of the time of this recording, but the numbers were as follows. 7.9% said yes, that's 7.9%. 13.2% said maybe, and 78.9% said no, and that's out of 38 votes. So very interesting results. I'm seeing similar results over on Facebook. And again, like I said, here in my district, we are set to return. We're calling it an optional and part-time return as of June 1st. A lot of parents and educators still concerned about that. If you're looking for some great reading, make sure you drop by the Teachers on Fire magazine on Medium, where recent writers have included Michael Gibson, Samantha Fesich, Tom Hobson, Jamie Brown, Debbie Tannenbaum, and myself. The Teachers on Fire magazine is a Medium publication, and you'll find it on medium.com or on the Medium app. If you'd like to join our writing team, your first step is to create a Medium account using your Google credentials. Message Teachers on Fire on any social media platform for more details and to get started. Speaking of blogging, that's with a B, check out the Teacher Blogs podcast. My latest episode there features an awesome post written and read by Lynn Thomas on the critical role of happiness in learning. Check it out on the same podcast player where you are listening right now. I will leave you with this quote from my reading Teachers on Fire. It's from a book called Leaders of Their Own Learning, Transforming Schools Through Student-Engaged Assessment. And this book was absolutely phenomenal during my master's program. It really expanded my vision of what is possible. Again, the title is Leaders of Their Own Learning, Transforming Schools Through Student-Engaged Assessment. It's written by Ron Berger and a few other authors. And they write, student-engaged assessment involves students in understanding and investing in their own growth. It changes the primary role of assessment from evaluating and ranking students to motivating them to learn. I'll read that again because I think it is so rich. Student-engaged assessment involves students in understanding and investing in their own growth. It changes the primary role of assessment from evaluating and ranking students to motivating them to learn. Again, I'm your host, Tim Cavey, and I'm so grateful that you decided to spend some of your day listening to this podcast. I hope that in some way the content you heard from Shannon Schinkel ignited your thinking and inspired your practice. And I'll meet you next week right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast. Take care, stay safe, and keep on learning.